Local Edge, powered by Canada Media.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Local Edge, your show for better understanding and connecting with small communities all across the country. Here, we explore the value of these markets to advertisers, agencies, communities, and much more. We bring you the latest news, insights, and trends from the world of local marketing and advertising. I am your host, Shawna Randolph. In this show, we talk to community connectors, media buyers, business leaders, and more to find out what makes small communities so important to the advertising industry. So, whether you're an advertiser, agency, community member, or just simply interested in the world of local advertising, join us here on Local Edge for a closer look at the power of small communities in Canada. And joining us now from Montague, Prince Edward Island, is Paul McNeil. He is the publisher of PEI Canada. Very nice to meet you, Paul.
Delight to be here.
Of course, not everybody has been way out on the East Coast where you are, so let's start with talking about your publication specifically out on Prince Edward Island.
Well, if they haven't come, they really should. I mean, there's a lot to do and see here. Look, PEI is Canada's smallest province, obviously, 165,000 people, predominantly in the Charlottetown area. We operate rural papers. So our primary paper where I live is in a town called Montague, which is about 50 kilometers east of Charlottetown, a service center of 15,000, but Montague proper is 2,200 people. We have another community paper at the western end of the island. And in between, we have a publication that covers agriculture. PEI is a very vibrant agriculture community, and harness racing, which is also a vibrant, small, but flourishing industry on the island.
So you have a strong connection to the community, I'd assume, as well?
Yes, we do. In all of our communities. I mean, really, everything we do here is about how can we build this place? How can we make it better? How can we produce the best newspapers we can? Do all our fiduciary responsibilities as good journalists, hold government accountable, ask the tough questions. But also when the community needs a lift, we do what we can to give it a lift. Because we're all in this place. And if a community newspaper isn't there to support its community, I'm not really sure why it's in business.
Let's talk about the big picture of how different smaller communities, the people living in it, consume their news as compared to someone watching maybe out in Toronto may have in their environment.
Well, in our case, in Montague, our paid circulation has remained incredibly stable over the years. And I sort of attribute that to the fact that we don't go chasing after other news. We don't follow other news. Just because a politician wants us to go to a press conference doesn't mean we go. We are a local paper that decides our own agenda. It doesn't mean we're a renegade, but it just means that we try to put our resources where they can best fit and deliver maximum benefit to our readers. And to my way of thinking, best benefit to our readers is to give them something they haven't seen anywhere else. So that's what we do. And we try to do it every week. Some weeks we succeed, some days we don't. But it's a nice way to deliver news. Doesn't mean we ignore the web. We have a strong web presence. But we've never been driven by clicks or clickbait. What we put up there is what we put in the paper. A lot of times, some extra stuff. News is still king for our print products.
Let's talk now about advertising. How big is the gap between urban and rural advertising, Paul?
Well, I think in a lot of ways we do better than an average job in terms of generating revenue from the local community, just in terms of what we do and how we do it on a regular basis. I think one of the challenges that small community newspapers like myself has is that the decision makers are fewer in any community. And that is a challenge because, when I was growing up, there was 2 or 3 dress stores and a couple of men's stores and a TV repair shop. And those have all gone by the wayside. So it's important to build connections with the local community. And, we're reasonably successful at that. Not as good as we could be some weeks, but, that is one of the challenges, is decision makers are making decisions outside this community on where their marketing dollars are spent. And sometimes we don't necessarily win those types of decisions.
So what do you say to those decision makers to influence them to choose to advertise with one of your publications then?
Well, look, I would say read our paper on an ongoing basis, and you'll see why we're different. I mean, I understand the lure of social media. I understand how it can amplify some messaging. But I think, if you open your paper and you want to sell something or drive people to an event in Eastern PEI, we're the best way to do it. Because we're the one with sort of the intimate connection and trust with the people who live here. And that's a responsibility we take very seriously, because they put their trust in us every week to deliver news that is relevant to them, to cover their communities, tell them what they need to know, and also be their voice if they want to respond. I mean, we have incredibly vibrant editorial pages, and letters to the editor are a huge part of that. And that's, some people may perceive it as an old-fashioned thing, but a dialogue with the community is a really important thing for papers to maintain. And we're, so far, knock on wood, still doing a pretty good job of that.
Okay, and you're pretty easy to reach, are you?
We are really easy to reach. Main Street Montague, and my email is paul@peicanada.com.
All right, thank you so much. I appreciate your time, Paul.
Real pleasure. Thank you.
That's Paul McNeil. He is publisher of PEI Canada.
Do you love your pets? Western Canadians sure do. Do you know the average expenditure on pets per household per year in Western Canada is almost $800? That's over $6 billion. For more data like this and a better understanding of connecting with local markets, please visit adcanadamedia.ca.
Joining us now from Toronto is Sarah Thompson. She is president of Dentsu Media. So nice to have you on, Sarah. Hi.
Hi, thank you for having me. This will be a great topic to talk about as well. So I'm thrilled. Anytime I get to talk about this is great.
It is. I'm so excited as well. Before we dig in, tell us about Dentsu Media.
Dentsu Media is one of the largest media networks in Canada. We have 3 brands underneath us: Karad, Dentsu X, and iProspect. We support clients in buying media and advertising in Canada.
And you're also with the Canadian Media Directors Council. I've heard about this, but just for everyone watching, what is that?
Canadian Media Directors Council is an association that represents about 97% of all advertising dollars invested in media. So this is every agency holdco network. And as part of this, I am part of the board, but I'm also part of a group that is cross-agency collaborators working on something we call the Media Manifesto.
What is that? Yeah, I was going to get into that. Another term people hear about this. Yeah. And you're excited to talk about it, aren't you?
Oh my God, I am incredibly passionate about this topic and have been for years now. And it's really great to start seeing it gain so much traction. It's been a slug, but for everybody listening and watching, we know in Canada, we have a huge problem. During COVID, we've lost over 3,000 journalism jobs. We've had 50 publications close. We have more news deserts and ghost newsrooms in our country than ever before. And we want to hit a hard reset. We want to make sure that we have a vibrant democracy, because more journalism means more voting, more politicians held to account. And the other part of this too is it's a way of keeping cohesiveness in communities. It's a way of people understanding what's going on. And when you think about geopolitical issues, climate change, the sense of ostracism in our country, all of these things can be addressed by making sure that we have a vibrant Canadian local media news and system in Canada. And it's been eroding and we need to fix it.
So how are you going to do that? It sounds so daunting.
It does sound daunting. There's a few elements of it. One is that we have all of the agency holdcos committing to a certain percentage, especially in digital media investment, so display advertising and website advertising, to make sure that we're actually redirecting dollars into Canadian media. That's a hard slog, and we're holding ourselves to it. We all submit a list on an annual basis of the media buys that we've had on behalf of our clients, anonymized, no clients are attached to it, but to show the partners that we're spending money with and how much of that money is staying in Canada. When we did evaluation before this, what we found was only about 25 cents of every dollar was actually staying in the Canadian media ecosystem, which is frightening if you really think about it. So we need to course correct that. And we need to start thinking about, like, how do we make that connective tissue happen? So it's also a lot of education for chief marketing officers, for vice presidents. It's empowering the junior people on our teams, people who are new to our industry, of how to plan, how to understand. It's thinking through the data that we use to decide on plans and investment approaches for our clients and how we can build that in. And the final piece is actually infrastructure, knowing that there's really great independents that are popping up in Canada right now. And there's a few like IndieGriff and others that are building new models around how local news and local media can thrive again in our country. We have to support them as well. So we give them a platform so that they can connect with people like me and tell their stories. So there's a lot of different things that we have to do to address this. There's not just one thing that we can do.
Let's talk about the importance of this. You kind of touched on it a little bit about holding, let's say, politicians accountable, but it's also more than that, isn't it? It's about like trust of the audience into who they're listening to, reading about, or seeing, right?
Studies after studies on both sides of the border in the United States and Canada, and this is historical, shows that Canadians trust local news more than they do national news. There's a lot of reasons for that. Does the newsroom actually represent my interests? It's much easier in a community newspaper, in a community media publication, to say, like, that's a member of my actual community. They live here, they understand it, and they're here to serve my interests. And we often think of things like just politics, but there's other elements. Eroding infrastructure. When is my highway closed? When is the school closed? What's happening with crime in my community? What's happening with the local sports teams? To celebrate, all of those opportunities too in my community, we want to see that have a resurgence, because it does make us feel more a part of something than an otherness. And that's really also what we're trying to combat. Is we have a lot of issues around social cohesion and making people feel like they're a part of something. And local community newspapers are critical in making that happen.
What do you see would be the ultimate negative outcome if we didn't have local media down the road?
Well, it's been very clear and very well studied. You start to have a lower voter turnout. So you start to see people not engaged in local politics and voting. You start to have people feeling a little bit more of a populism type of mentality. So not feeling like there's an other, that there's somebody that I'm fighting against, versus finding a way and a means of seeing connective tissue because we're all part of the same communities. A lack of information, a lack of awareness. If you think about even, the last few years of floods and fires that have happened in Canada, and even most recently, the hurricane that went up the East Coast, without local news, you would not be able to stay informed. And we know platforms like Twitter and others are not trusted sources, right? From a moment a news story breaks to the moment that it's actually resolved of what is going on and what do I need to do as a citizen, that can be hours. So there's even a sense of like, how do I stay connected and be aware of what some of these issues are for me, and how can I protect my family and stay safe?
And journalists are held accountable, right? Sometimes people think, well, they can just get away with anything. That's not true.
It's absolutely not true. And it's one of the other things that we need to pay very close attention to in Canada. In the United States, they've had a lot of private equity, right-wing organizations buying up local news and local media publications. And that's to serve their agenda, right? Instead of having balanced news and journalism and stories that are representative. But there's also another spot that we never consider, and that's investigative journalism, the people who are digging into the stories. You can see it recently with the mayoral and John Tory story that the Toronto Star broke. I remember working with Robin Doolittle when she was talking about rape kit lack of testing in Toronto with the Toronto Police Department. These stories are important. These stories need to be supported. And as we pull away from that, who is digging in to find the truth and to bring us the facts? That's the core testament of what journalism does, and holding that to the highest standard. Citizen journalism does have a space, but we need to have a balanced point of view of actually how these issues affect us.
Sarah, before we wrap up, anybody watching, what is your direction? What would you like them to do to help you with what you'd like to achieve?
Well, first and foremost, subscribe. Make sure you're supporting your local community news. You're listening to your local radio stations. The second is really pay attention to the advertising that you are ingesting. And if you are a marketer, in the same way that you talk about corporate social responsibility and you talk about sustainability and all of those other issues, this is part and parcel of that. Being a great corporate citizen is also ensuring that we have a vibrant media ecosystem in Canada. So go ask your media agency how much money is staying in Canada right now.
Okay, hopefully we've inspired people. Thank you for your time, Sarah.
Thank you.
That's Sarah Thompson. She is president of Dentsu Media.
Do you sell sports, athletic, and recreation equipment? Do you know the average expenditure per household in Canada is $223? In some areas of the country, it's over 40% higher. For targeted data like this and to get a better understanding of connecting with local markets, please visit adcanadamedia.ca.
And joining us now from Toronto, Ontario is Kelly Levson. She is Director of Research with News Media Canada. Great to talk to you again, Kelly.
Hi, nice to see you again too.
We love talking numbers and statistics together, so of course that's what we're going to be doing on this show. So let's start off with your latest report. What do you have for us?
So every year we produce a report called Snapshot, and it covers the state of circulation for newspapers in Canada. So we just recently released the current report, and it covers daily and community newspapers and gives a really high-level overview of what newspaper circulation looks like in Canada. So the quick numbers are basically over 1,000 newspapers in Canada. So for those who think that newspapers are not as influential or widespread as they used to be, there's still a ton of newspapers out there. We measure as many newspapers as we can keep track of. Our database is maintained on our own. We search out the information. We try to keep it up to date. It is by no means exhaustive, but it is the best look that we can get at where the industry stands. This report includes data on 949 community newspapers and 71 daily newspapers. So in total, there's 1,020 newspapers reflected in this most recent report.
Do you also take a look at circulation, Kelly?
So we do. We take a look at both print and digital. The majority of it is still print, but when we take a look at newspaper circulation in total across the country, there's almost 30 million newspapers every single week. That's not, for the year, that's not over a month, that's every single week, almost 30 million copies of newspapers out there. And when we talk about community newspapers, those local, down at the smallest level markets, there's almost 14 million copies of those circulated in markets from coast to coast. And like I said, mostly in print on the community newspaper side.
So how does this all break down into ad revenue?
So as an ad medium, newspapers have still not recovered from the COVID impact. So the numbers are still down compared to where they used to be. But in total, there's almost $1 billion in ad revenue every year. This is based on the most recent data we've been able to collect, which is from 2021. And this reflects both print and digital revenue. It includes different types of ad revenue like national or retail or classified. And when we talk about the newspaper revenue, there's also circulation revenue. So ad revenue is one thing that's coming from the advertisers, but there's also a lot of revenue from the circulation side, as a lot of newspapers mostly on the daily side, are paid. There are digital subscriptions as well as print subscriptions. So we also collect data on the circulation side as well, and that's just over over 500 million in revenue from circulation, in addition to 942 million in ad revenue.
Are you seeing this revenue change over time? Is it increasing, decreasing?
Newspapers have struggled, I'm not going to lie, when it comes to ad revenue. Once digital ad revenue started climbing, mostly on the internet side from companies like Google and Facebook, social media took hold. A lot of that revenue came from newspapers. So it's not as high as it used to be, but still represents a really large number. And I think that's what people are really unaware of. And the reason for the revenue numbers that they are now is that, like I've mentioned before, there's a high level of trust when it comes to newspaper ads. People still trust the content that they see in their newspapers. And that's, when it comes to editorial, it makes sense, but it also extends to the ads that you see in that paper as well. So when it comes to trust, community newspapers really have a foothold there. Community newspapers and their websites too are really hyper local. They represent the neighborhoods and the communities that they serve, and they can target those communities far better than many other media. And the reason for that is because their publishers are invested. The news that you see in your local community newspaper reflects the life around you. And that's what people are looking for. We've talked about this before, where we ask questions on every survey. Why do you read your local printed community newspaper? And the number one reason is always for that local information. That local information comes from people in the community. And those independent publishers, and one of the facts actually that's in the snapshot report is the split between independent and corporate ownership of newspapers. So 45% of community newspapers across this country are independently owned. That means the people that are publishing them live in these communities. They work in these communities. They support these communities. They are heavily invested in everything that goes on, and that's what they put in their papers. And this is an investment that really pays off when it comes to trust, when it comes to revenue. Other media, like Facebook or Google, for example, they don't give back to communities like the community newspaper publishers. They don't invest in local sponsorships. They don't invest in the local economy. So when advertisers put their dollars into their community newspaper, they know that they are supporting the place that they live too. So local ad dollars are really important on the community newspaper side.
Wow, you have so much in-depth information here, Kelly. Bottom line, what is your message, the takeaway for anybody considering investing in advertising in local communities?
You need to put your ad dollars where people are going to be receptive. The content in community newspapers is what draws the readers in. And I know I mentioned this before as well, but almost 3/4 of readers want to support the advertisers in the paper. So it's a receptive audience. It's a good investment, and it goes a long way to supporting the communities that it reflects. So this report that I'm talking about, it's available online. There's way more information than what I'm touching on right now. It covers circulation by province. It looks at paid versus free. That's actually something that I should mention as well. A lot of community newspaper circulation is controlled. What we call controlled is really free. So it's distributed to every household in a community. And on the daily newspaper side, it's primarily paid. On the community newspaper side, it's primarily free. And one of the reasons for this is to facilitate flyer distribution. So when we talked about reasons for reading community newspapers, flyers are a huge draw, and a lot of advertisers want to be able to reach every household in a community. So that's really pushed a lot of publishers to move to the free circulation model. And just because they're free doesn't mean they're not read. I mean, our numbers show that more than 8 out of 10 Canadians read newspapers across the country. So clearly people are still reading even when that circulation is free. Once it gets into the home, it usually gets picked up by everybody in the home. So flyer distribution really relies on that free, reaching every household distribution model.
Kelly, wonderful information again. How does someone actually read that report? You were telling us that it is online. Where?
So you can download the snapshot report from the News Media Canada website at www.newsmediacanada.ca. It is available in both a PDF and a spreadsheet format. There are a lot of numbers included in it. If you want the spreadsheet version, it'll allow you to put some formulas in and manipulate data as you need. And there is also an accompanying fact sheet with some high-level snippets of information, as well as a map that shows you across the country where the circulation is. So it's all available on our website.
All right. Thank you, Kelly. That is Kelly Levson. She is Director of Research with News Media Canada. We will be talking to her quite frequently on the show.
Who is spending the most per household on bicycles in Canada? Head to the rural markets in British Columbia to find the answer there at $122 per household. That's about 2.5 times the national average of almost $53. For targeted data like this and a better understanding of connecting with local markets, please visit adcanadamedia.ca.
Thank you, everyone, so much for joining us here on The Local Edge. Again, I'm your host, Shawna Randolph. For additional information and extended interviews, be sure to subscribe to the Local Edge podcast on any of the major platforms. You have Spotify, Apple, Google, many more. Also, make sure that you do take the time to subscribe, because then when we release a new episode, it goes right to your mobile device. It's very easy. See you next time on The Local Edge.
Local Edge, powered by Ad Canada Media. This series is proudly produced by the team at Road 55. Road 55 creates content that connects. For more information, check our website, www.road55.ca.